Dad, Christmas this year is just for us. Immediate family. You're not on the list. That was how my son typed it. No phone call, no explanation. A text message sent at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in my truck outside the hardware store in Bozeman, Montana, still wearing my coat because I hadn't bothered to start the engine yet. I read it twice. Then I read the next message, the one from my daughter-in-law that appeared maybe 40 seconds later, like she'd been waiting with her thumb over the screen. No offense, Leonard, but honestly, you haven't exactly earned your place at our table. Maybe someday. Leonard. She called me Leonard, not Dad, not even Mr. Ferris. Leonard, like I was a stranger she'd met at a neighborhood association meeting couldn't quite place. I set the phone on the passenger seat, face down. Outside, the December sky was the color of old pewter, the kind of sky Montana does in winter when it's telling you something. The parking lot was half empty. A woman was loading bags into her minivan 2 spaces over. Normal Tuesday afternoon, the world entirely unaware that something had just shifted. I picked the phone back up, opened my banking app. I hadn't looked at the recurring payments section in a long time, maybe a year, maybe longer. When you set things on autopilot, you stop seeing them. You just feel the money leaving, and you tell yourself it's fine, it's family, it's what you do. I looked now. Mortgage assistance, $2,400. Car payment for my son's truck, $619. Car payment for my daughter-in-law's Tahoe, $541. Health insurance gap coverage, because their plan had a deductible they claimed they couldn't manage, $390. Phone plan, all 4 lines, $210. The monthly grocery top-up I transferred every first of the month because things are tight, $400. I sat there in the cold truck, doing the math I'd been avoiding for 3 years. $6,159 a month. A woman's voice on the radio drifted through the speakers. Something about a Christmas sale at a furniture store. I reached over and turned it off. I typed back a single message to the family thread. Understood. I'll be making some changes to my automatic payments today. Enjoy your holiday. I sent it. Then I waited, watching the read receipts appear. First my son's icon, then hers. I put the truck in reverse and drove home. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We read everyone. My wife, Carol, passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by September. That kind of fast, the kind that doesn't give you time to adjust, only time to watch, and then time to regret everything you didn't say during the years when you assumed there would be more years. After she died, my son was the only immediate family I had left. His 2 kids, my grandchildren, a girl, 7, and a boy, 4. I redirected everything that had been going toward Carol's care toward them, not because they asked, because I didn't know what else to do with grief except fill the space with something useful. My son had taken a job in Denver 3 years earlier. Good company, middling salary, a lifestyle that ran about 20% wider than his paycheck. His wife had stopped working when the kids were born and showed no signs of reconsidering. They bought a house in a suburb that sat just past the edge of what they could afford. I helped bridge the gap. It felt like love. It felt like being needed. I never asked for a seat at their table. I just assumed I had one. That Tuesday, I drove back to my house on the edge of town. The house Carol and I had bought when my son was in high school, and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. The house was quiet in the way houses get quiet when they've had people in them and then don't anymore. I opened the first payment, mortgage assistance, found the scheduled transfer in my bank portal, the one that went out automatically on the 28th of each month. I moved the cursor to the cancel option and held it there. My son had texted back by then, 3 messages in quick succession. Dad, come on. She didn't mean it that way. Just call me. I did not call him. I clicked cancel. A dialog box appeared. This recurring transfer will be permanently stopped. The recipient will not receive notification. I confirmed. The status bar turned gray. I said out loud to the empty kitchen, $2,400. Not anymore. The truck payment was next. I found the autodraft linked to his lender, the one I'd set up when he said the payment was killing them that first year, and he just needed 6 months to get stable. That was 27 months ago. I canceled it. $618. Stopped. His wife's Tahoe, the one she described as a safety necessity because of the kids. $541. Gone. The health insurance supplement. The phone plan. The grocery transfer. By the time I finished, my phone had 31 missed calls logged. The first 17 from my son, then several from a number I didn't recognize, which I later figured out was his wife calling from a neighbor's phone because she'd assumed I'd block hers. Then my son again. I did not answer any of them. I made a pot of coffee, which I do out of habit even when I don't need it, and I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard where Carol's bird feeders still hung from the ash tree. She'd filled them every 3 days, year-round. I'd kept them filled since she died, even in January when the only birds that came were the sparrows too stubborn to go south. I thought about her. I thought about what she would say. She would not say, "Go back and help them." That was not who she was. She believed in consequence the way some people believe in God, with the kind of faith that comes from having seen it work consistently over a lifetime. She also believed in dignity. She used to say it was the one thing you couldn't borrow from anyone else. I refilled the bird feeder at dusk, had a routine, and went to bed early. Wednesday morning, I woke up and made a list. Not an emotional list. A practical one. If I was going to do this correctly, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I opened my laptop and started pulling documents, the title on my name for the truck I'd co-signed, the lease agreement I'd signed as guarantor for their first apartment before the house, old bank statements showing 3 years of transfers. I had, by my rough calculation, put somewhere between $190,000 and $210,000 into their lives since Carol died, not including the $60,000 I'd given them as a down payment on the house, which I'd called a gift at the time. I wrote that number on a notepad, looked at it for a while, crossed it out, wrote it again. It wasn't the number that bothered me. It was the casualness of, "You haven't earned your place at our table." As though I'd been a contractor bidding for a job and had come in low. As though love was an invoice that could be disputed. I called my accountant that morning. Then I called a property attorney I'd used years ago for a boundary dispute with a neighboring ranch. His name was not in my phone under attorney. He was just Hal, who I knew from a decade of occasional professional dealings and a shared appreciation for dry-aged beef and lukewarm college football opinions. I told him the situation in broad strokes. He said, "You co-signed the truck." I said, "Yes." "How long ago?" 14 months. "Is your name on the title?" "Primary." He was quiet for a moment. "Well," he said, "that's actually straightforward." Thursday, my son showed up at my door. I knew he was coming before he knocked. The security light in the driveway triggered on my phone, the same system I'd installed after a string of porch thefts the winter before. I watched him on the small screen, sitting in his rental car for 4 minutes before getting out. He stood in the cold for another minute, hands in his jacket pockets, breath visible, looking at the front door like it might open on its own. He knocked. I let him in, because he was my son. Whatever else was true, that remained true. He sat at the kitchen table, the same chair he'd sat in as a kid doing homework. He looked tired. He'd driven or flown in quickly. That was obvious from the wrinkled shirt and the bag he'd left in the car. He said, "Dad, I need you to understand that wasn't what we meant." I poured him coffee without asking. Set it in front of him. "What did you mean?" I asked. He started with the stress, the job pressure, the kids' schedules, the way things had been difficult. He said his wife was overwhelmed and sometimes said things that came out sharper than she intended. He said she respected me. She just needed space to feel like the holidays were hers. I let him talk. He was good at talking. He'd been good at it since he was a teenager. That smooth way of reframing things until what had happened sounded like what hadn't quite happened. When he stopped, I said, She called me by my first name and told me I hadn't earned my place at her table while I was paying her mortgage. He looked at the coffee cup. That's what was meant, I said. However it came out. He stayed 2 hours. Left without resolution. I watched the taillights disappear down the road from the porch. The temperature had dropped. Montana, December doing what it does. I stood there longer than I needed to, looking at the dark road, the tree line, the stars beginning to come out in the east. Carol used to say Montana nights were the only honest thing left in the world. I think she meant the stars didn't care what you thought of them. I went inside and fed the dog. I hadn't mentioned the dog yet. His name is Burl. He's a 10-year-old lab mix who belonged to Carol before he belonged to both of us, and now belongs to me. He sleeps by the wood stove and expects nothing from anyone except a walk and his dinner on schedule. He is the most uncomplicated relationship in my life. I sat on the floor next to him for a while that night, which is something I'd started doing after Carol died and never stopped. He put his head on my knee. That was enough. The following week, I received a voicemail from my daughter-in-law. She'd gotten my number through my son, clearly, since I hadn't blocked his line yet. Her tone had changed significantly from the original text. She was sorry. She'd been under stress. She'd misspoken. The family needed me, and she needed me to understand that they valued me. She'd just been having a hard time expressing it. I listened to the whole thing. 43 seconds. Then I called Hal. I want to start with the truck, I said. I can have a letter drafted by end of week. And I want to look at the cosign on the original apartment lease, even though that's expired, just for the paper trail. Smart gives you a documented history of support if they try to claim something informal. I spent the following weekend going through paperwork. Not angrily. There's a difference between angry and deliberate. Angry makes mistakes. Deliberate makes records. I found a folder from when I'd set up the grocery transfers, a note I'd written to myself about what account to pull from, and a reminder that the amount might need adjusting if their rent went up. My own handwriting. Practical, organized, like I was managing a client account. In a way, I suppose I had been. I found photographs, too, in the same filing cabinet where I keep the financial papers, old ones from before Denver. My son and I at his college graduation. Christmas morning, when the kids were 2 and 1, both of them in pajamas with little reindeer on them, sitting in my lap in the living room of this house. My daughter-in-law laughing at something Carol had said, her head thrown back, looking genuinely happy. I did not throw the photographs away. I put them back where I found them. Christmas arrived, the way it does when you're alone, quietly, and then suddenly. I'd made no specific plans. The town put lights on Main Street. The diner where I have breakfast most mornings hung a wreath on the door, and the hardware store played carols through a speaker by the register. Normal December. I drove to my sister-in-law's house on Christmas Eve. She lives 40 minutes north, on a property she and her late husband bought in the 1980s and never left. She's Carol's younger sister, and she is one of those people who takes no detours in conversation. She said what she thought, and she thought clearly. I told her the whole story over dinner. She listened without interrupting, which is her best quality. When I finished, she said, "My sister would have cut them off in October. She would have been more diplomatic about it." She would not, she said, and refilled her wine. We talked until late. I drove home in the dark, Burl asleep in the back seat, the heater going. Montana flat and black and enormous, outside the windows. It's a particular feeling, driving through that landscape at night. Everything enormous. Your own problems. The correct size. I spent Christmas Day working on a project I'd been putting off for months. The detached garage needed a new workbench. I built it from scratch, measured and cut and assembled it over 8 hours, with the radio on and Burl sleeping on an old rug in the corner. By evening, I had something solid and level and mine. That night, my phone showed a photo sent from my daughter-in-law's number. My grandchildren sitting on a sofa in what I assumed was their Denver living room, wearing Christmas pajamas, both of them looking at the camera with that particular expression children get when adults tell them to look sad. The caption read, "They keep asking why Grandpa isn't here." I stared at the photo for a long time. This was the only part that cost me something real. Not the money, not the embarrassment of having been used. The kids. They were 7 and 4. They hadn't done anything. They didn't know what was happening or why. They just knew their grandfather wasn't there, and someone was asking them to perform their confusion for a camera. I locked the screen and set the phone face down on the workbench. Spoke into the empty garage. "I know, I'm sorry. But that's not fair to them either, using them like that." Burr looked up from his rug, then put his head back down. I turned the radio back on and cleaned up the sawdust. January arrived with a letter from Hal. Formal notice sent to my son's address. Certified mail regarding the vehicle registered in my name. The notice stated that, as primary owner, I was exercising my right to reclaim the vehicle and that arrangements would need to be made within 14 days for its return or a formal buyout at current market value. My son called the morning it arrived. "Dad, this is insane. You know I need that truck for work." "Then you should buy it." "I can't afford to buy it right now." "I know." He went quiet. I said, "You can't afford a lot of things without my help." That was true before Christmas, and it's still true. The difference is, I'm no longer pretending it's sustainable. "So what do you want? An apology?" "Fine. I'm sorry. She's sorry. Can we move forward?" "I want you to stand on your own. That's what I've always wanted for you. I just made it too easy not to." He said things after that. Some of them were angry. Some were sad. I recognized the sad ones as real and the angry ones as panic. I let him say both. When he finished, I told him the 14-day clock had started with the letter and that Hal was the point of contact going forward for anything related to the vehicle. I ended the call. Then I stood in my kitchen for a while doing nothing in particular. February, my daughter-in-law posted something on Facebook. I don't use Facebook, but my sister-in-law does, and she texted me a screenshot. The post said something about family members who abandon you when you need them most, about how money had corrupted someone she used to trust, about raising children in the shadow of cruelty. 40-some reactions. Shares in the people's feeds. I read it once. I found 2 photographs on my phone, screenshots I'd saved in December. The original text from my son and the message from my daughter-in-law about not having earned my place at her table. I texted them to 3 people who I knew had seen her post: my accountant, who had also become something of a family friend over the years, my sister-in-law, and a man named Gil who'd been my closest friend since we were in our 30s and who had met my son many times over the years. My message to each of them was short. This is what preceded the situation she's describing. I'm not going to respond publicly. Wanted you to have the full picture. That was all. I didn't post anything. I didn't call anyone else. I didn't explain myself to people who didn't know me well enough to matter. Those who'd known me for 20 or 30 years would form their own conclusions. The rest were welcome to theirs. The truck was recovered in mid-February. My son had driven it back to a dealership lot in Denver and made arrangements through Hal without further incident. I sold it 2 weeks later and put the money into a short-term CD at my bank. March, my son's wife filed a complaint with the Denver Police Department, apparently claiming some form of financial abuse. I received a call from a detective. I told the detective I had documentation for every dollar I had transferred voluntarily over 3 years, that I had never co-signed anything under duress, and that my attorney would provide the full paper trail within 48 hours. Hal had the documents organized and sent by the following morning. 3 days later, the detective called back. The complaint had been reviewed and closed. He apologized for the trouble. I said, "No trouble at all. I understand people do unexpected things when they're under pressure." I hung up. Then I called Hal. Told him what happened. He said, "Filing a false police report is not a small thing." I said, "I know. I'm not going to pursue it. They're doing enough damage to themselves." He was quiet a moment. "You're more measured than most of my clients. I've had a longer life than most of your clients." Spring came late that year, the way it always does in Montana, insisting on one more frost just when you've started to believe it's done. I kept to my routines. Work, which for me means managing some investments and consulting for a small agricultural co-op I've been involved with for years. Walks with Burl in the morning along the creek road while it was still cold enough to see your breath. Breakfast at the diner, occasional evenings at my sister-in-law's. I did not hear from my son or daughter-in-law directly after the police matter. My son sent 2 emails in April, both of which I read and archived. The first was angry. The second was quieter, more confused than accusatory. He was trying to understand how things had arrived here. I recognized the question as genuine, but could not think of an answer that would help him, rather than just comfort him. I did not reply to either. What I thought about in that period was not them. It was myself, the version of me who had set up that first automatic transfer 3 years ago and told himself it was temporary. The version who kept renewing the arrangement month after month because stopping felt like withdrawing love. I had confused being needed with being valued. They are not the same thing, and I should have known that earlier. I'd known it in my business life for decades. I just hadn't applied it where it hurt to apply it. Carol would have spotted it sooner. She had a clarity about people's actual motivations that I sometimes lacked. She called it reading past the story. What people said they needed and what they actually needed were frequently different things, she said, and the kindest response was usually not to the one they were telling you. She was smarter than me. I've always known this. It's not a hard thing to admit when you love the person. May, my sister-in-law, mentioned in passing that she'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that my son and daughter-in-law were having serious difficulties. Not financial only. Apparently the marriage itself was strained. She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask her to. I thought about my grandchildren. 7 and 5 now. The girl would be starting 2nd grade in the fall. The boy would be in kindergarten. Normal, enormous milestones in the lives of children who had no part in any of this. That night, I wrote my son a letter, an actual letter, by hand, which I have not done in years. I did not mail it that night. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand and went to sleep. I reread it in the morning. It said what I had intended it to say, that I had not stopped loving him, that the consequences he was experiencing were not punishment but arithmetic, and that I hoped when things stabilized, he would think clearly about what he wanted his life to look like going forward. I also said that I would like to know the grandchildren as they grew up, not through him or his wife as intermediaries, but on their own terms as they got older. I mailed it. He called 3 days later. It was the first phone call in months that wasn't about a specific crisis. He sounded tired in a different way than before. Less panic, more exhaustion. Like a person who'd been running and had finally just stopped. He said, "I didn't know she'd been telling you those things. About not earning your place. She said it to me differently than she texted you." "I know," I said. "People usually do." "I should have said something when it started. Years ago." "Yes." He was quiet. "I don't know how to fix this." I said, "You probably can't fix it. You can just do better going forward. That's usually how it works." We talked for 40 minutes. It was not a reconciliation. It was something smaller and more honest than that. 2 people talking clearly after months of performing the wrong parts. I didn't promise anything and neither did he. We just talked. When we hung up, I sat for a while at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, which is a habit I've had my whole adult life and will likely never break. Burl was asleep under the table. Outside, the first real warmth of the year was coming through the window. That specific Montana spring sunlight that's been gone long enough that you'd almost convinced yourself you'd imagined it. I thought about my son. I thought about the boy he'd been at 11, 12, 13, when he was still becoming whoever he was going to be, and hadn't yet made the choices that would shape him. I thought about how much of who he became was him, and how much was what I'd given him too easily. Let him get too comfortable with. Never asked him to earn. I didn't have a clean answer for that. Maybe there isn't one. Children become who they are through some mixture of what they're given and what they make of it, and parents spend the rest of their lives trying to figure out which parts they're responsible for. Summer came properly. Long days. The smell of sage in the morning, Burl slowing down a little on the walks, but still insisting on them. I put a small garden in on the south side of the house, which I hadn't done since Carol was alive. Tomatoes, a few herbs, some zucchini that immediately got out of hand the way zucchini does. My son's wife moved out in June. I heard this from my sister-in-law, not from my son. He confirmed it a week later in a short text. Said the kids were with him, said things were hard, asked if they could talk sometime. I called him that afternoon. We talked for over an hour. Practical things, mostly. What the arrangement with the kids looked like. Whether he had enough support around him. Whether the job was stable. He was managing, which was the honest word for it. Not comfortable, not well, but managing. Getting through days. Showing up. At the end of the call, he said, "Dad, I need you to know I understand now why you did what you did. I'm not asking you to reverse it. I just want you to know I get it." I said, "That's enough." And it was. Late August. My son drove the kids up to Bozeman for a long weekend. First time I'd seen them since before Christmas. 8 months. I didn't make a production of it. I cleaned the house, put clean sheets on the guest beds, bought the specific cereal my granddaughter liked, and the apple juice boxes my grandson had requested through his father with a seriousness that apparently required 3 separate reminders. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. My granddaughter walked up the porch steps and stopped in front of me and said, "Grandpa, your beard is longer." Then she walked past me into the house to find the dog. My grandson stood on the porch looking at me with the kind of careful assessment only small children can fully commit to. Then he said, "Hi," and went inside after his sister. My son and I stood on the porch for a moment after they'd gone in. He looked older. Not badly older, just more settled into his face. The way people look when they've been through something real and are still standing. He said, "Thank you for this." I said, "Come inside. I made chili." We ate dinner at the kitchen table, all 4 of us. My granddaughter told me at length about a book she was reading about horses. My grandson discovered that Burl would accept food directly off a plate if no adult was looking, and spent the meal testing this theory. My son ate 2 full bowls of chili and looked, for stretches of the meal, like someone who had remembered how to breathe. After the kids went to bed, my son and I sat on the porch with coffee. The August night was cool and clear, the stars the way they get in Montana when there's no cloud cover. Which is to say, more stars than makes complete sense. He said, "I kept thinking, when everything fell apart, that you'd come back in and fix it, like you always had. And then I realized that was the problem." I didn't say anything. "I think I'm going to be okay," he said. "I don't know, but I think so." "I think so, too." We sat there for a while without talking, which is something you can do with someone once you're through performing for each other. Burl lay between us on the porch boards, thumping his tail occasionally for no apparent reason, the way old dogs do. The town below was quiet. A few lights on the highway. The soft sound of the creek somewhere in the dark. Normal Friday night in a small Montana city that didn't know or care about the particular education my son and I had both been receiving over the previous 9 months. I had not gotten back what I'd spent. I didn't expect to. That money was gone, and the lesson it bought was expensive, and probably could have been acquired more cheaply if I'd been paying closer attention earlier. But I had my dignity, which I hadn't known I was losing until the moment someone told me I hadn't earned a seat at a table I'd been paying for. I had my house and my mornings and my dog and the garden that had produced an embarrassing surplus of zucchini. I had, tentatively and carefully and without any promises, something that might become a real relationship with my son. Not the one we'd had, which hadn't been as real as I'd thought. Something more honest. Possibly better. The stars didn't move. The coffee went cold in my hand. My granddaughter came to the door in her pajamas and said she couldn't sleep, and could she sit outside for a minute? I said yes, and she sat in Carol's old chair, pulled her knees to her chest, and looked at the sky without saying anything else. The 3 of us sat there like that for a while, not talking, not needing to. Some things you don't earn. Some things you don't pay for. They just come back to you quietly when you finally stop trying to buy them.